In today's video, we're taking a look at some offseason rumors involving teams like the Edmonton Oilers, Arizona Coyotes, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. We also have the latest test results from Phase 3 of the NHL Return to Play, and we have the award nominations announced for the Selke Trophy as well as the Norris. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Let's start off with a few quick news items, including the latest test results on COVID-19 testing that the NHL released today. Of course, we're halfway through the training camp phase 3. Teams will be heading out to their Phase 4 hub city bubbles in about a week's time. And so far, the NHL has only had 2 positive tests. So that's really good. So far, things are going really well, and it doesn't look like there'll be any chance of there being any kind of hiccups or whatnot to get to Phase 4 and actually get the games underway. There's still, always possibility of things happening. So we're halfway there. Phase 4 will be getting underway in the not too distant future. Of course, we also had some updates on broadcast teams announced for the return to play games as well. So it looks like Sportsnet will be doing the world feed from the Edmonton Hub City, and NBC Sports will be doing the world feed from the Toronto location. So should be lots of hockey on the way here very soon. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly counting the days until we have live NHL action to watch here once again. Now, as I mentioned as well, we had some more award finalists announced today, some nominations for the Selke and the Norris Trophy. No real big major surprises. The Selke Trophy had a lot of usual suspects, including Bruins forward Patrice Bergeron, Flyers forward Sean Couturier, as well as St. Louis Blues forward Ryan O'Reilly. Now, these 3 guys are widely considered some of the top two-way players in the NHL. Not a real surprise that they ended up being the finalists, but there's certainly a few guys around the NHL that could have gotten snubbed and may not have gotten as many votes as I kind of thought, that maybe make things a little bit closer. You could put Mark Stone of Vegas in that regard. He's one of the best players when it comes to takeaways. I know Montreal Canadiens center iceman Philip Deneau seemed to be garnering a lot of attention around the league and his strong two-way play and how much he's improved over the last little while. Even Anthony Cirelli in Tampa was getting a lot of consideration as well. And I think all of those players certainly did get some votes as well. And once we've learned the full voting results after the winners are announced, we'll probably see that they very well could end up being 4th, 5th, 6th place finishes for those guys. But unfortunately, I think a lot of voters are voting based on the fact that these 3 are just so solid year after year, and they also have some better offensive totals to go with that strong defensive play than some of the other guys I mentioned. Of course, Mark Stone's not really an exception to that rule, I guess, but either way, if we can see guys like Cirelli and Deneau improve their offensive numbers and continue that strong play, probably what it's going to take for them to get more into that conversation. Now, in regards to the Norris Trophy, the finalists are John Carlson of the Washington Capitals. Of course, you've got Roman Josi of the Nashville Predators and Victor Hedman of the Tampa Bay Lightning. So that's 3 really solid defensemen. Nice to see Josi get in there. I think he's often very underrated, and he's really strong at both ends of the ice. So that's good to see. I think Dougie Hamilton would have been in that conversation and probably would have been a finalist if he had not been hurt. He was having a phenomenal year prior to his major injury. Obviously, some other guys like Jacob Slavin, Alex Pietrangelo are also having some really solid years as well. But these are your 3 finalists. I think they're all deserving to be there, and I guess we'll see who wins. It's difficult to predict right now. I mean, Carlson had a phenomenal offensive year. Josi was really strong on both ends of the ice. So was Hedman, so not sure. But let me know for both these awards amongst the finalists, who are you picking to be the winner for the 1920 season? Now, as I mentioned as well, I want to take a look at some off-season rumors concerning a few NHL teams. Let's kick things off with the Edmonton Oilers and some recent information from Sportsnet's Mark Spector talking about the potential future of Andrea Athanasiou in the Edmonton Oilers organization. Of course, Ken Holland, the GM of the Oilers, acquired him ahead of the NHL trade deadline. And of course, it's a player he's very familiar with coming from Detroit, where he worked for so long. He was involved with drafting and developing him. And of course, managed the team while he played his first few years in the NHL. But so far, he hasn't been as great a fit with the Oilers as they were hoping. I know he didn't get to play a lot of games before the NHL season was paused. But between what we did see and what we've seen so far in training camp, it just kind of looks like he's having a hard time fitting in, although they were really looking forward to his speed in the top 2 lines, playing a top 6 role with either McDavid or Draisaitl. And right now, that's just unlikely to happen. I mean, he could still be a valuable third line piece. But, certainly I think the Edmonton acquired him with the intention of keeping him, but now I think they might be questioning things, but we still have some games to go before they really have to make a decision. Clearly, if he finds a way to fit in and produce offensively, then obviously that's going to help get himself a new contract and remain with Edmonton. But the only problem is he's a restricted free agent coming up here in the offseason, and he's required to be offered a $3 million qualifying offer to retain his services. So that might be a little bit rich based on the season that he's just completed, unless we see some drastic improvement in this play-in and playoff rounds. Ken Holland might not be wanting to pay that, even though it's a player he went out and acquired and gave up some assets to get him. That might be a little bit rich for their blood, considering, especially with the flat salary cap and the fact that, they have a lot of other tough decisions to make here. They can't be overpaying guys. There's just no wiggle room to do so. And many teams are going to be feeling the pinch and taking similar strategies as well. So they have some options. They could obviously trade his rights, maybe at the NHL draft, recoup maybe a second, third round pick, something to that effect, and get an asset in return and cut their losses and move on. They could choose to not offer him a qualifying offer, make him an unrestricted free agent, and then, of course, even then, he could sign with the Oilers again, or he could go elsewhere. Now, of course, they could always work out a deal, because I know I've seen other teams and players do this before, where a player was not qualified because of the qualifying offer that was required, become an unrestricted free agent, and then re-sign with the same team, but for a lesser amount. I mean, Ken Holland might be willing to pay maybe 2.5 on a short 1-2 year contract, something like that, and they might have to go that route. But I guess it depends on how negotiations go between Holland and the agent for Athanasiou. They can probably have something worked out ahead of time, and if it's not looking like that's going to work out, then obviously they could very well trade him. I mean, obviously, there's lots of teams that could use his speed. He's still relatively young. He can play a variety of forward positions, which makes him somewhat versatile. I mean, things didn't necessarily work out in Detroit. He has 30-goal potential. With that kind of speed, if he can put it all together, he could be a real find for some of these teams. And if you look at some of the younger rebuilding teams, it might be an easy situation for them to take a chance for a small asking price, whether you're looking at a team like the Devils or the Senators. I don't see him really going back to Detroit, but I guess you never know. But probably unlikely, considering they just traded him at the NHL deadline. Look around the league at some other teams. Maybe some of the California teams could certainly use an injection of speed, like the Sharks, for example, are a team who could use some more youth on their side. Hard to say exactly where he ends up if he gets moved, but I do think there's still a room and a marketplace for Athanasiou in the NHL, but it's just difficult to say longer term if he remains with the Oilers. But as I've said about a lot of players, this opportunity he's going to have for the return to play in these playoffs will certainly dictate his future and what opportunities he's going to have, whether it means staying in Edmonton or going elsewhere. But what do you see for the future of Athanasiou and the Oilers? Do you see him being traded? And if so, where do you think is a good landing spot for him? Or do you think he likely finds a way to re-sign in Edmonton, whether it be for that $3 million qualifying offer or less? Now, I also want to take a look at the Arizona Coyotes. Craig Morgan, who's formerly of The Athletic, now has his own site called AZ Coyotes Insider. Of course, The Athletic actually had scaled back and actually had moved on from a bunch of reporters here just a few weeks back. I think it was back in June. So obviously it's nice to see him landing on his feet. Craig Morgan's a great reporter, very well respected, and he now has his own site, which is a subscription-based service, but it's a small price to pay for some great reporting on the Coyotes. So if you're a Coyotes fan, I certainly recommend you check that out. Obviously, we're talking about now the fact that how the flat cap is going to impact Arizona and what moves they might need to make. Clearly, the Coyotes right now have a big priority in trying to sign superstar Taylor Hall, who they spent a lot of assets to acquire well ahead of the NHL trade deadline this season. And of course, they already have $80 million in salary commitments for next year without signing him or a few other guys as well. And we only have a cap of 81.5, so that's pretty tight. They're going to have no choice but to find ways to shed salary if they want to have any hope on keeping Taylor Hall. And even if they don't, they still need to sign a few other players to kind of round out their roster. So there's going to be some cost cutting. It's just a matter of exactly who ends up being the cap casualties here. Now, of course, in this article, he outlines the top 5 players he feels are most likely, including at the top of that list would be center iceman Derek Stepan. Now, of course, Stepan is entering the latter stage of his career. He was acquired from the Rangers along with Antti Raanta a few years ago. It turned out to be a pretty decent deal so far for them. But Derek Stepan is not exactly what you'd call a number 1 center iceman. The problem for the Coyotes is his cap hit is $6.5 million, and he's not producing at that level. But based on his signing bonus already being paid, it only leaves $2 million in actual cash that will be owed to Stepan for next year. So that's, a pretty interesting thing. So obviously a team who wants the cap hit to bring their numbers up, but doesn't have to pay out a lot of cash for a remainder on a contract for a veteran guy for a couple of years who can actually, give them a solid maybe middle six role if he can take a smaller role and still produce on a solid maybe number 3 center iceman. That would make more sense. So again, the teams near the bottom of the standings that are not participating in this play-in round would be your top likely landing spots. So of course that'd be a way for them to shed a big-time cap hit. Of course, you've also got goalie Antti Raanta, who doesn't have a lot of term left on his deal, but you know what? The way Darcy Kemper has played, he very well might have stolen that longer-term starting goaltender position from him, and they don't need to carry 2 guys who want to be starters. I mean, they could hang on to them if they can make it work financially, because there's no problem having 2 solid goalies, but Raanta has often been injured and been some tad bit inconsistent, so if they can move on from Raanta, that's certainly another way to possibly find some cap space. I think there's a lot of teams that would be interested in Ranta's services. The other thing, too, with the Coyotes, when it comes to goaltending, would be that obviously they'd be at risk to lose one of these guys to Seattle if they remain the goaltending tandem for another year, because they probably would protect Kemper at this point, and they could end up losing Raanta to Seattle, so they might want to move on, try to get something ahead of time. So that's a possibility too as well. And of course, you have to look at some defensemen like a Jason Demers or an Alex Goligoski. A little trickier to do. Not sure there's a lot of value there, but certainly if you look at like a guy like Goligoski making over $5 million, that's a contract who they could certainly move on from and save a lot of cap space to help sign these other players that need to be signed and have a shot at getting Taylor Hall. Of course, you also have a guy like Michael Grabner, who's listed in this article too as a potential trade target. Obviously, Grabner's a player who doesn't quite produce the way he used to, but certainly well known for his shorthanded goals. He's well known for his speed. So again, another team looking for a veteran guy who can play the PK, be a threat offensively when he's out there on that kind of situation, and obviously play more of a bottom 6 role. Could be interesting in Grabner, but again, I think that's going to be a little bit tricky. I think Stepan has more value just given the fact of the actual cash being paid out compared to the cap hit. And then, of course, Raanta is still a decent goaltender. To me, those are the top 2 likely trade candidates for Arizona to save money. I think the other ones will be a little bit trickier and harder to do. Not to say that they can't find a way to do it, but John Chayka is going to have to get super creative here because the Coyotes, in my opinion, are in a little bit of a financial mess when it comes to their cap situation. And obviously, they need to round out this roster. And if they don't get Taylor Hall signed, that's going to be a big waste of assets that they gave up to get him from New Jersey, only to have, a short season from him. And we'll have to see how Hall and company does in this play-in series coming up here shortly. Can they get into the full round of the Stanley Cup playoffs and do some damage? That could make things very interesting and obviously make a big impact on a lot of their decisions. Now, lastly here, we want to take a look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. Another Athletic article, this time by James Myrtle, taking a look at a mailbag type article at some players who might be expendable and we could see be moved out of Toronto during the offseason. Of course, one of the questions was, do you think there's a lot of value in trading players like an Alexander Kerfoot, like an Andreas Johnsson, or a Kasperi Kapanen? And clearly, those are the 3 top players that are often mentioned in trade rumors. They have a number of UFAs, many of which likely won't return. You get some space in the blue line with guys like Tyson Barrie and Cody Ceci likely leaving. You get Jason Spezza, who's questionable. I'm not sure there's really a solid chance he returns. I think he would be interested. I'm not sure they can fit him, but we'll see. There could be some mutual interest. Of course, there's Kyle Clifford, who I'm sure has mutual interest on both sides to get him returned, but again, going to be tricky to do. From the RFA standpoint, they got Travis Dermott and Ilya Mikheyev, so they're all players who likely would want to be back too. So clearly the Leafs could kind of go cheap on the blue line. They may not spend a lot of money, whether it be through trade or free agency, because it's going to be tough to do. Murdoch goes on to say in his article that he doesn't see the Leafs really moving a big time forward for a defenseman. He sees it being done more so as a salary dump, and out of the 3 forwards I mentioned, the only one he really sees having much value would be Kasperi Kapanen. He feels with Andreas Johnsson and the season he had and the injuries that there's going to be, obviously not as much value there. And I've said that before too. I certainly agree with that analogy. I think teams are going to be a little iffy on Johnsson until they can get a chance to see him play. And obviously that's unlikely to happen unless the Leafs go on a really deep playoff run. I don't really see there being an opportunity for him to get back and have a chance to play. So that's, unlikely going to happen. And then, of course, like I said, you've also got Alex Kerfoot, who I think out of the three would probably be their lowest preference player to move, because he can play center ice and he can be that number 3 center iceman behind guys like Matthew and Tavares, and actually, be more versatile in that regard. So I think they would probably rather hang on to him than the other two if they really had to come down to it. But Kapanen seems to be the player that's coming up as having the most value. He mentioned teams like Ottawa or New Jersey who are rebuilding and could use a player like Kapanen where he could get a bigger offensive role, maybe be a solid 20-30 goal scorer, be a middle six type player who can play in a lot of situations. I mean, he obviously thrived when he had a chance to play with Matthews, put up some bigger offensive numbers. We've seen him play, the PK. He can certainly play in different special teams. So Kapanen could be a player who's, certainly has an opportunity to go to another team, play a bigger role, and like I said, kind of, really fully realize his full potential here. And he seems to be the most likely candidate that Myrtle feels will be moved, but it would be done as a salary dump, not necessarily to bring in, a top 4 blue liner. He feels they're going to go cheap on the blue line. So if you take a look at what their options are, they've already got guys like Riley and Muzzin and Hall under contract. You sign RFA Travis Dermott to a reasonably short term, probably not too expensive a contract. You got guys like Rasmus Sandin, Timothy Liljegren, who's been in the system for a while, and obviously they signed Mikko Lehtinen. You give all of them more of opportunity along with Hall, and then Riley Muzzin. They still got Marty Marinson in the system, so they could probably get by. I'm not sure how successful that blue line would be, but that's what Myrtle sees the Leafs doing. And I think obviously this playoff run is going to be, again, like I said, for many teams, a big-time eye-opener on what they really have back there. And obviously it's going to dictate a lot of their future moves and what these players end up doing in the future as well. So let me know what your thoughts on the Maple Leafs. What do you see them doing in regards to making salary cap room? Do you think Kapanen's the most likely logical cap casualty? And do you see a possibility existing where they actually do, like Myrtle says, go cheap on the blue line instead of bringing in a top 4 blue liner that we really thought that they were going to do for quite some time? I know the flat cap kind of changes things, but can they be successful without doing that? That's the question. I'd love to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.